We believe in research at Gensler. All design is a research opportunity so that we really learn from our projects. And that feeds into our research so that we continually learn from our research and it applies back to the projects. It's a virtuous design research cycle. And so what I'm going to share with you is what we've been learning over the pandemic. And I'm going to share some of our yet-to-be-published research that's going to be coming out in December. So we have a deep legacy of research in workplace. We've been studying it since 2005. I've been involved since 2008. And we've been studying how people work over time. And we think about it as 5 key work modes. You're working alone. You're working with others, both virtually as well as in person. Learning, which includes professional development, and then socializing, which is building social capital. It's really about connecting and networking across an organization. And we've been studying how we spend our time in all 5 of these work modes, and we've seen it start to change over time. And I will tell you, we've been spending about half of our time working alone since we've been measuring this. It has suddenly dipped in our newest research, and we've doubled the amount of time that we're spending in learning and in socializing. And that's come at the expense of reducing working alone. But even pre-pandemic, people preferred the workplace to work, if the workplace was effective and actually helped them do their work well. And if it didn't, then people preferred to work at home. But we saw that as we've been measuring space effectiveness and experience over time, we saw that pre-pandemic, both had declined. The workplace no longer worked. And as we looked at these as it related to all 5 of those work modes, in February 2020, right before the pandemic hit, we had seen that there was a sudden decline in all 5 of those work modes. And so that got us thinking, does the workplace still work? Does it still matter? How do we fix this? And then, the pandemic hit. And work has changed and expectations have changed as a result of the pandemic. We're now thinking in terms of why should I go to work? And you've seen the revolts that have been occurring. I live in the United States, and Apple employees and different employees have risen up at this return to the office. And so we did a series of 11 different research projects during the course of the pandemic. We did 6 in the United States at different points of the pandemic, and then we did it in the UK, India, France, Australia, and in China. And we were particularly interested in China because they had gone home and already come back. So we wanted to understand what was working and not working. And what we saw is that most workers really want this hybrid. Home is good for some things, the office is good for others, but they've enjoyed this flexibility and autonomy and being able to have the best of both worlds, not the worst of both worlds. And so as we looked at what their preferences are, you can see that it varied across the globe. In the US, it was about 1 in 2 people, office workers, that really wanted hybrid. Ironically, that's exactly where we are right now in our latest survey of those that are back to the office. We saw 2 out of 3 in the UK, in India, in Australia. It was 3 out of 4 in France. And in China, remember I said they had gone home and come back? It's 4 out of 5 Chinese office workers that really want this hybrid work model moving forward. So the idea of hybrid, that's a new term. But mobility is not new. As we have been studying this over time, we've been measuring how much are you at the office and how much are you working in some of these other locations. So Elon Musk, everybody needs to come back at Tesla, a minimum of 40 hours a week. Well, I'm here to tell you, according to the data, we have never been at the office 100% of our time. The average in the US was around 80%. Didn't seem to vary since 2016. But the most innovative firms were even at the office less. They were spending their time working in other locations. And in fact, in February 2020, right before the pandemic hit, we measured it at 67% of a typical work week at the office. So you can see that in our latest survey, which we have not even published yet, so you're in the cone of silence, we saw that people are back on an average of 51%, but the most innovative are 46%. But then when we ask, what is it that you ideally want to be at the office in order to maximize your personal productivity and your team productivity, suddenly we see that people actually want to be at the office more often. So why aren't they? We found this really interesting. I can't wait to dig into the data more as we continue to analyze the information. Because the most innovative actually want to come back to the office even more than the average. But you see at 67%, which was right where they were pre-pandemic. So it makes us think about how can we create spaces for people to be able to do their best work. So what's the office best for? And we wanted to really unpack that and understand it because it gives us some clues. So during the pandemic, we saw that the number one answer for why people wanted the office was to work in person with my team and colleagues. And that was true if it's generation, by industry, by country, regardless of the timing during the pandemic. But we want to be, working in person and having those connections and socializing with colleagues, but look at what's in red, to focus on my work. That was equally important and was a top reason. In fact, it was number 2 in India and China, to focus on my work. Now, when we start to think about the office and what does it mean of being able to balance both in-person work as well as that focus on your work individually. We saw that employees at top performing companies prefer the office for that deep concentration to be able to focus on my work as well as creative and ideation tasks. What do we mean by top performing companies? We asked 3 very, very simple questions. We said, has your company recently been on the best places to work list, the most innovative list, and the most admired list? And if they answered yes to all 3, that turned out to be 24% of our respondents. We treated it as a top quartile. If they said no to all 3, that was 28% of our respondents, so we treated that as a bottom quartile. And then we simply compared the 2 groups. Quartile analysis is often how Gallup does a lot of their analysis. And we saw that top performers prefer the office for a wide range of activities, but they also prefer working outside the office. It's not just home or the office. See those shades of orange. You've got co-working and alternate office locations. Third places, and we define third places as coffee shops, parks, libraries, and other third places. And this is in descending order according to about 20 different work activities working alone and about 20 different work activities working with others and where they preferred to do those activities. And you see that brainstorming and ideating with coworkers is right at the top. But so is thinking and ideating by yourself or work requiring deep concentration. Those are things that are really working solo. At the beginning of the pandemic, we heard that people wanted to do that at home, but that's not what the data is telling us. The data is telling us that people really want to do some of that at the office. And it's not till the very bottom of the list does home start to outpace the office for things like reading. But you see that dark orange, that all these third places, these are also locations where people prefer to work. So work is occurring both in and outside the office. And for the first time during the pandemic, we saw some generational differences. We saw that younger workers actually have a different view about the workplace and how that should work, as well as the third places and how they use those for work activities. And so this is slicing that data, looking at by generation. And again, you see collaborate with my team, the number one choice all through the pandemic. But then look under Gen Z, our youngest workers, the ones just coming into the workforce. They prefer, number 3, to maximize individual productivity at the office, be visible for promotion, inspiring creativity and innovation. These are all important reasons to come together in the physical workplace. So this is breaking out by those detailed work activities. I'm just going to share 3 of them. This is looking at deep concentration, where people prefer to do it. And you see that Gen Z, it's about equal distribution between the office, co-working in third places, and home to do deep concentration. Boomers, and I'm a boomer, very binary, either home or the office. But Gen Z is in the younger generations, the younger you are, the more these third places and co-working sites start to play an important role. This is looking at giving and receiving feedback. Think about that in terms of, project work throughout the week. 50% of Gen Z wants to do that in these third places and co-work sites. And finally, unplanned meetings. Think how often during the day we have unplanned meetings. And yet 57% of Gen Z wants to do that in places other than the office or home. One of the things that we love doing at Gensler is comparing our research from various studies. Our cities research. We've done a lot of research in understanding college universities and how college students think. This is the next workforce that is entering the workplace. And so we've spent a lot of time understanding how students learn and how they use universities. It shouldn't be a foreign concept that you use the university one way and an office workplace a different way. And so if you think about how college students work and learn throughout a college campus environment, well, they don't just study in their dorm room or the library, right? They use the whole campus for individual study, for group study, for just enjoying one another, coming together, relaxing, reflecting. And when you talk to college students about hybrid classes, this is what they told us. About half prefer fully in-person classes. The other quarter, like fully remote classes, and the other are kind of hybrid and mixed. You can apply this to meetings today. Not all meetings are ideal in person. Not all meetings are ideal on a Zoom or Teams call. Sometimes you just want to, depending on the purpose and the topic of the meeting and the tempo and how much you need to accomplish, the intention of the meeting, you may want to do different things. And so we need to be designing our office spaces to do the same. We found that choice is an autonomy about having choice where to work within the office environment is a key indicator of not only an effective workspace, but also a great experience. And we've seen choice start to rise tremendously through the years as we've looked at the US data. In fact, right before the pandemic, it was at 48% of US workers said that they had choice of where to work within their work environment. It is now at 72%, which has not been published yet. That's a huge increase. And we see direct correlations to space effective scores as well as great experience scores. And so choice is such an important component of work policy and how we approach the workplace itself in terms of design. Because we know that it's not enough just to have an effective workspace. It's got to work, it's got to function, it's got to do the basic things of getting your work done. But then when you adding a great experience, making it a place where somebody wants to be, Together, the two of those start to really impact business outcomes and ultimately the business performance. And so when you can start to draw a direct correlation to that, it starts to really get the attention of the business leaders that we're designing for. In fact, we've been able to correlate a high-performing workspaces with a positive impact on business performance. So this is looking at the green bar, the top quartile of those in the highest performing workspaces, compared to the bottom quartile in blue of the lowest performing workspaces. And we see it has a number of impacts. In fact, we saw this pattern in every indicator we asked in the survey that we just have done over the last few months. We see that it's double in terms of personal health and well-being or career advancement, but it's things like speed of decision making or personal or team productivity as well. Even a sense of belonging, and we often talk about having that sense of belonging is a key reason that people want to come together and be together. Sense of belonging and being included was a direct positive impact as well, including even relationships with your colleagues. So how do we rethink a physical workplace for a post-pandemic future? I'm going to share some of the takeaways that we're seeing in our own research and some projects that start to really do that. So we know this very next phase as we start designing and reimagining the office of the future is going to be all about piloting, experimenting, and learning what works and doesn't work, and then starting to apply that and scaling those ideas to the greater whole. And as we start thinking about these pilots, it's so important to really take the time to talk with the end users, hear and really listen and understand what's important to them. Why are they coming to the office? What are things that we can do to actually nudge certain behaviors? Maybe those are healthy behaviors. Maybe those are ways of pulling people together and making people feel included. And that's really designing to the very edges of the organization and the people that are going to be using that space. It's all about creating a workplace ecosystem. A workplace ecosystem are spaces and places both in the workplace as well as outside the workplace. Think about it in terms of the extension of the workplace into the community and into the neighborhood. How can you start to activate and use all these spaces as opportunities for places to work in a way that starts to engage and excite and inspire the young generations that you're designing for? Treat it like a college campus. How can you start taking the principles of planning in a college campus or a mixed-use environment, start to bring them to the workplace in the broadest sense? I believe strongly that the workplace must be a compelling destination, not a mandate. It's not about setting targets for how often people need to be there. How do we create it as a place where people want to be? Because if people feel like they have choice and autonomy to pick the spaces that they need best for that activity, now you've really created a carrot instead of a ruler of how to entice and bring people back to the office. People are the new workplace amenity. It's all about being together. We are tribes, we are groups, we are used to having these social connections. So how do we create places for people at the workplace? It's not about designing the next great desk to work alone. It's really thinking about how do you convene people in a way that the coaching and mentoring and the like starts to happen naturally. This is a Verizon project in Boston at Hub on Causeway. And this is an area that is open to any team to start to use. It's actually at the top of the building. And it's a place that people just gravitate to throughout the day. That's what I'm talking about in terms of meaningful experiences. But at the same time, we need to design spaces where people can really concentrate and get that deep concentrative work done without noise, without interruptions, without distractions. And that's visuals distractions as well as acoustic distractions. And as we start thinking about deep concentrative work, it may be that we need to flip the script of how we've always designed. Instead of designing open plan areas for people to come in and sit down and focus and get up and go in an enclosed conference room to actually meet, maybe we need to design more open spaces for people to collaborate and come together and create noise and create the energy and get up and go into an enclosed room in order to focus. Go into that enclosed room in order to do a webinar or learning. Go into that enclosed room because you're trying to signal to others that I don't want to be interrupted. And so it's time to rethink how we design in new ways and imagine new experiences. This is actually another photo of the Verizon project I mentioned earlier in Boston. So their space is primarily open plan. So what did they do? They created a library. That library you could actually go to, and it's open to anybody to use, and everybody knows what the rules are at a library. You don't talk, you don't take a phone call. It is a place for quiet, heads down work. It's for reading, it's for taking a break, but they use this library for that deep concentrative. The other thing we're seeing a lot in the States is creating quiet zones. So we have on the East Coast the Amtrak train, and it travels from DC to New York. And normally you can sit anywhere on that train, but there's something called the quiet car. If you book a seat on the quiet car, you cannot talk. You can't chat with your neighbor, you can't take that phone call. You better get up and go into another car or the cafe car in order to do that. That's kind of how these spaces start to function. And we often talk about how to recreate the quiet car at the workplace. We also need to create spaces for that creative group work. You know, not all meetings are the same, as I mentioned with college students. Not all classes are the same. So how do you create spaces for brainstorming and ideation and problem solving? And equip those spaces with the right technologies so that you're able to really move the work forward and create spaces that people can't do back at the desk or they can't do at home. That starts to really draw people back and draw them in. And we've got to solve this idea of spaces for hybrid meetings. You know, that right now, hybrid meetings don't always feel inclusive. They don't always feel equitable. We've got to re-script how we run them, how we do it from a technology standpoint, so cameras eye to eye with people. And we've got to get technology that really starts to support that at the drop of a hat. Because moving forward, you may be asking the question, am I healthy enough to go to the office today? And so how can we make an in-person meeting suddenly hybrid when it needs to be? We need spaces for one-on-one coaching and professional development. This is why the young staff is coming in. They crave this. They haven't been able to do this all during the pandemic. It was very tough for you to have to schedule a Zoom call. So as we start to come back, people are craving this quick touch base. How am I doing? What could I be doing better? And that's true for even people that have been in the profession for a long time. And so that means we need to be thinking about not only places in the open, but semi-private spaces, private space, and as well as enclosed private spaces that may be for these scheduled meetings or just ad hoc as the meeting pops up, as you're walking back from a conference room. Let me give you some pointers on how you did during that meeting, and step into one of these spaces and utilize it. We need access to fresh air and connect to nature for well-being. This is actually a photo of our Costa Rica office right here in town. And it has a number of terraces that people are able to utilize and throw open the doors and let that fresh air in. You guys are so blessed. We don't have the same wonderful weather in Washington, D.C. But even in Washington, D.C., we've started designing these spaces that you're opening the glazing and activating the fresh air. This is a natural part of how you guys design spaces, and I encourage you to just do that even more moving forward in the future. But it's important to equip those spaces, not only for work, but also for social and community. So let me give you an example. This is a DC space that was created to open up on the top of the building and start to make that fresh air. And it even has a grill. It has places to be able to have social get-togethers. And they opened it to the community. They've offered this space when they're not using it to others outside the building to be able to use. And finally, And actually Verizon, with this project as well, opens it up for nonprofits and other people to use when they don't have it booked. So it always remains activated and active. And finally, don't even forget the outdoors and how you can start to engage the neighborhood and the whole community into the property or into opening up the ground floor of the building to truly be a great neighbor and be inclusive and engaging with everyone in the community. I believe we have an opportunity as organizations to really make a difference in our neighborhoods, and this is certainly one of those projects. So finally, I'll just leave you that the workplace matters. I believe it's more relevant than ever. We have this opportunity once in a generation, once in a lifetime, to really make a difference. Not only fix what doesn't work that we saw that wasn't working before the pandemic, but reimagine an entirely new experience. Gracias.